here, China's proposal for the dual suspension and parallel progress, as well as the Russian roadmap for a DPRK solution, including the gradual establishment of a peace mechanism for the region and denuclearization of the DPRK, we think is an appropriate launchpad for such talks. We call upon all to participate in this work. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation.
Okay, we've just been listening in on the UN Security Council emergency meeting on North Korea, which is now underway. We've just heard the Deputy Russian Envoy to the UN, Vladimir Safrankov, speaking. He said that Russia supports the full denuclearization of the DPRK, also urging that a solution must be found through dialogue and not provocation. He also underlined Russia's commitment to the joint statement issued by China and Russia on Tuesday, calling for a halt to North Korea's ballistic and nuclear programs in exchange for a halt to US-South Korean military exercises. Now, the US has threatened to take action against North Korea after Pyongyang test-fired a new missile in violation of UN sanctions. The statement came from Washington's ambassador to the UN during an ongoing session of the Security Council. RT's Caleb Morpin joins us now live from New York with more details on what we've heard. Caleb, thanks for listening in. What sort of action is the US threatening to take against North Korea?
Well, the language was not specific, but the United States did threaten action not only against the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, but also against any country that, according to U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley, supports North Korea. This is what she said at the UN Security Council in Manhattan.
The United States is prepared to use the full range of our capabilities to defend ourselves and our allies. One of our capabilities lies with our considerable military forces. We will use them if we must. We have other methods of addressing those who threaten us and of addressing those who supply the threats. There are countries that are allowing, even encouraging, trade with North Korea in violation of UN Security Council resolutions. Such countries would also like to continue their trade arrangements with the United States. That's not going to happen. 90% of trade with North Korea is from China.
So there we have Nikki Haley, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, talking about the possibility of military force, not just against the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, but against countries who trade with them. And this comes just in the aftermath of a Twitter storm from Donald Trump accusing China of trading with North Korea, saying so much for trying to work with China around North Korea. Now, China has said that all of their economic relations and trade with North Korea is completely legal under international law. They have defended their activities and stated that accusations coming at them from the United States are simply inaccurate. This seems to be a new row between the United States and China regarding the situation on the Korean Peninsula. Now, in the past, we have heard China and Russia propose to urge North Korea to end their tests of missiles, their nuclear proliferation, in exchange for an end of war games, war and military exercises in the South by the United States and South Korea, as well as opposition to the THAAD missile system, this missile system that both Russia and China objected to, which is being erected in South Korea by the United States in cooperation with South Korea. Now, when the Russian ambassador spoke, he did point out that according to Russia, it is inaccurate to say that the DPRK tested an intercontinental ballistic missile. According to Russia, this was actually an intermediate-range missile that was not capable of hitting the United States. Now, that certainly changes the circumstances of the debate. If this was indeed not an ICBM, if this was only an intermediate-range missile, and then it seems that the claims from the United States that this was a missile capable of hitting the continental USA were just not accurate. Regardless, the test is being called a game changer. This launch of a missile by North Korea was from a site that the United States was not aware of, and apparently the type of missile used, regardless of what it was a type of missile the United States was not aware that North Korea possessed and was capable of testing and launching. So a lot of questions remain, but all eyes are on the UN Security Council at the moment. We're still hearing from world leaders who are speaking up as we've heard the threat of military force from the United States. We've heard Russia urging the elimination of possible military solutions to the conflict. Many statements being heard. China is presiding over the Security Council this month, and many different members of the 15-member body are chiming in and speaking up about the crisis on the peninsula. All eyes are on the UN Security Council in Manhattan.
OK, thanks for that wrap-up. That's RT's Caleb Morpin. Do keep across all the developments that are coming out of that meeting for us. But for now, let's cross live to our guest, Mr. Brian Becker from the US-based anti-war Answer Coalition. And Mr. Becker, thank you for joining us on the programme. Now, what do you make of the fact that the US has slammed China for its trade relations with North Korea?
Well, the United States is employing arm twisting against the People's Republic of China, arm twisting that I should say in advance will not work. Of course, the DPRK and China trade. They're border countries. They share a border. The Trump administration has tried and failed to force China to do something that China cannot do. The DPRK is a sovereign country. No foreign troops occupy its land, unlike South Korea, where tens of thousands of American troops actually occupy southern part of Korea and have big influence. No foreign power has a lot of influence in Pyongyang. So the United States and the Trump administration are lashing out against China, demanding China do something it can't do. The DPRK is saying to the world, look, if you have war exercises, so-called war games, which we do not consider to be games, which we do not consider to be funny, that simulate the destruction of our country, a country that had been destroyed by the U.S. Between 1950 and 53, we are going to take actions, including gaining nuclear technology and missile technology to have a deterrent. And the Koreans are not going to stop doing that. The Koreans have outlined a roadmap for peace for the past 3 years. We will suspend or have a moratorium on nuclear weapons tests and missile technology tests in exchange for the stop of these war games that simulate our destruction. And for the past 3 years, first under Obama and now under Trump, the U.S. says categorically no. But that's the roadmap. And now Russia and China are saying, yes, the dual track, the dual suspension is the way to go.
OK, we're going to have to pause our chat there. Mr. Brian Becker from the US-based Anti-War Answer Coalition. We're going to cross live to the UN Security Council meeting once again, where China's envoy to the UN is now speaking.
China finds this launching unacceptable. We strongly urge the DPRK to strictly abide by the resolutions of the Security Council and put a stop to any rhetoric and action that might further exacerbate the tension on the peninsula. At the same time, we call on all the parties concerned to exercise restraint, avoid provocative actions and belligerent rhetoric, demonstrate the will for unconditional dialogue, and work actively together to defuse the tension. On July the 4th, the heads of state of China and Russia exchanged views on the situation on the Korean Peninsula and agreed that the nuclear issue of the Korean Peninsula should be resolved through dialogue and consultation. The foreign ministries of our two countries issued a joint statement which expressed the common position and concern of China and Russia regarding the issue of the Korean Peninsula. The joint statement put forward the joint initiative of our two countries based on China's dual-track approach and a suspension for suspension proposal and Russia's step-by-step plan. The current situation on the peninsula is complex and sensitive, and the dialogue process is in a standstill. The China-Russia joint initiative is aimed at addressing both the symptoms and the root causes and taking integrated measures to strive for a solution. It is objective, and the dialogue process is in a standstill. The China-Russia joint initiative is aimed at addressing both the symptoms and the root causes and taking integrated measures to strive for a solution. It is objective, fair, reasonable, and feasible. We hope that it will get the support of the international community and help open a realistic route towards the resolution of the problem of the Korean Peninsula. China has always insisted on realizing the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, maintaining peace and stability on the peninsula, and seeking a solution through dialogue and consultation. China has always been firmly opposed to chaos and conflict on the peninsula. Military means must not be an option in this regard. The deployment of THAAD anti-missile system in Northeast Asia seriously undermines the strategic security interests of regional countries, including China. As such, it's not conducive to the realization of the denuclearization of the peninsula and the regional peace and stability. China urges the countries concerned to halt and cancel its deployment immediately. Denuclearization of and a lasting peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula are in the interests of all parties. We hope that the parties concerned will work together with China, play their due role, and shoulder their due responsibility, with a view to returning the issue of the Korean Peninsula to the right track of peaceful dialogue at an early date. I resume my function as president.
OK, we've just been listening live to China's envoy to the UN, Liu Jie, who is also currently the Council President. He called on all parties to exercise restraint. On that note, let's go back to our guest, Mr. Brian Becker from the US-based Anti-War Answer Coalition. Mr. Becker, thank you for holding the line there. I'm sorry to interrupt our chat. Now, as we were just saying, North Korea, it's an independent, sovereign country, something that the US seems to be overlooking. So why does Washington keep expecting Beijing to stop Pyongyang from violating UN resolutions as if it were a China proxy?
Indeed. I mean, that's what's so ridiculous about Trump's foreign policy. Of course, Obama had what's called strategic patience, which means no engagement, as if the North Korean regime would just sort of fall by itself, because that was the goal. Meanwhile, North Korea just continued to advance its nuclear weapons program. The Trump administration, frustrated by its inability to actually have any leverage over the DPRK, then blames the People's Republic of China for not exercising leverage over the DPRK. The DPRK and China have a historic relationship, but at no time, and anyone who knows anything about North Korea would think that North Korean sovereignty is somehow under the control of Beijing. The North Koreans were part of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty until George W. Bush declared North Korea, along with Iran and Iraq, to be part of the axis of evil and prepared to invade one of the axis, that would be Iraq. And then the DPRK withdrew from the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and said, guess what? We're not going to be Iraq. We're going to have nuclear weapons. And when they saw Libya disarm and saw what happened to Libya, they said, we're not going to be Libya. And that's the reality. China can't deter them or have them change their mind. What the North Koreans want is direct bilateral talks with the Washington government to say, let's end the Korean War. It's gone on since 1950. There was an armistice in 1953. All wars have a beginning. Most wars have an end. This one should have an end.
Whatever happened to that so-called honeymoon period between the Chinese President Xi Jinping and the US leader, when they famously shared that now infamous chocolate cake? I mean, that was back in April, and now we have Trump saying that he really tried to get along with China. Do you really think that's the case?
Well, you know what? Donald Trump says he's the great negotiator, but Donald Trump, you never know what his bottom line is. The Chinese had a bottom line. They wanted Trump to recognize the one China policy, but Trump was all bluster and bluff. And there he had the president of China in Florida eating dessert while he sent off 59 cruise missiles against another sovereign country, Syria, as if that was going to impress China. China's not going to be bullied. It's not going to make their knees shake. It's not going to make the knees of Kim Jong-un and Pyongyang shake either. These countries are countries that have been at war with the United States in the Korean Peninsula. China lost 1.5 million people. The Koreans lost 5 million. During the Korean War, and there wasn't one structure taller than one story still standing because of the U.S. carpet bombing and napalming and white phosphorus bombing. North Korea's, they've been through this. They're experienced, and China knows that DPRK will not be bullied. The only way to come to terms with DPRK is based on mutual respect and equality and to sign a peace treaty, not sanctions, not threats, not bluster and bluff. DPRK won't fall for it.
So what is North Korea really trying to achieve here? It's been provoking the international community for years with these missile tests and weapons tests. So far, they've only landed themselves with more sanctions and foreign pressure. What do they want?
They want a peace treaty and an end to economic sanctions, and they want to secure their country from any kind of imperial invasion, such as took place in Iraq and Libya. So they're not provoking the international community. That's the spin based on Washington's dominance in the international community at the United Nations. Just 3 weeks ago, the United States carried out a nuclear bomb dropping drill that simulated the nuclear destruction of North Korea. Nobody called that provocative. When North Korea sends off a missile test saying we're not going to be bullied, that's provocative. So, you know, the question, the narrative of North Korea's provocations and provocative activity in the face of the United States and South Korea carrying out the largest war exercises in the world, simulating the destruction, the invasion and destruction of North Korea, while that's never considered a provocation, that just doesn't ring true. That's a double standard, and we need to stop accepting the dominant narrative offered by Washington, the Pentagon, and echoed by the mainstream media.
Brian Becker from the US-based anti-war answer coalition, thank you for your time and sharing your expertise on the matter.
Thank you.